Well, I want to welcome everyone this evening. My name is Candace Summers. I'm the Director of Education at the McLean County Museum of History, and I am thrilled to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. I hope it helps get us in the holiday spirit a little bit. We could not have programs like today's without support from the community, our members, and people just like each one of you. If you enjoy today's program and want to help the museum continue to host quality educational programs like this one, please consider becoming a member if you're not one already, or making a donation by following the link that I'm going to drop in the chat box. And I would also like to thank Illinois Humanities for support of this program as well. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, who I know most of you or all of you probably know, I'd like to go over the format for tonight's program. We are recording the program this evening so that people who cannot join us later can watch it on our YouTube channel. If you have a question for our speaker, please submit it in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, or you can drop it in the chat box and I will read them at the end of the program. If you're having a technical issue, say with sound, please drop a comment in the chat box and I'll see if I can help resolve that issue. And without further ado, I am pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Bill Kemp, who will present tonight's program on McLean County Holiday Stories, which is illustrated with wonderful images that he's going to share with us. Bill, as most of you know, is our librarian at the museum, and he has been with the museum since 2003. In addition to his tireless work in the library and archives, he is also a regular contributor to the museum's Sunday column, Pieces from Our Past. And with that, let me introduce Bill Kemp.
Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. I hope everyone can hear me just fine. Not to state the bloody obvious, right? But the COVID-19 pandemic has made for really a most trying year. The holiday season is hard enough, even in the best of years. Christmas time, Jason Isbell sings, that's a time when folks go off the deep end. That's true, but now with the resurgent virus, shutdown, stay-at-home directives, and all the social isolation, things are getting pretty hairy and hard, I mean, honestly, and we have it pretty easy, speaking for myself. So it's been hard. After all, what's a holiday season without people, right? Without community, without your family, without your friends and your neighbors. Heck, even Ebenezer Scrooge, right, needed someone around to be the recipient of a Scroogian humbug or two. Humbug, I say, right? He needed somebody to direct that ire toward. So let's leave 2020 behind for 45 or 50 or so minutes now and journey back in time with the ghost of Christmas past. Of course, as Candace alluded to, as most always in recent public programs, my main goal here is to show super cool photographs from the McLean County Museum of History's Pantagraph Negative Collection. We hold some 1 million photo negatives from the Bloomington Daily newspaper, mid-1930s for the most part, until 2000 when the newspaper went digital. Many of the photos you'll see tonight come from this collection and are part of an ongoing long-term digitization project, and more on that in a moment. Okay. And here's one representative image from the museum's Pantagraph Negative Collection. On December 5th, 1948, there was a Santa Claus parade from the old Union Depot on Bloomington's west side to the courthouse square, now the museum square. And that's the museum in the background there. Most Pantagraph photos dating to this time were taken with a 4x5 Graflex speed graphic press camera, which produced large negatives that would later put 35mm film to shame. As we can see here, the granular detail is really quite striking. Someone once said the difference between physical film and digital film was the difference between a world of elegant molecules and a world of chunky pixels. The haunting beauty of these images really, I think, speaks to that aesthetic. Okay, then, we are not only digitizing thousands of Pantagraph negatives at the McLean County Museum of History, but we're then posting them on the Illinois Digital Archives website, where they can be enjoyed for free by the public at large, by you. So we're going to kind of go through that process of how you search for photographs, in this case, photographs regarding the holiday season. The IDA, or the Illinois Digital Archives website, was created in 2000 as a repository for the digital collections of the Illinois State Library, but also other libraries and cultural institutions throughout the Prairie State. It includes not only photographs, but oral histories, manuscripts and letters, posters, maps, even videos, and a whole lot more. There are hundreds of collections, several hundred collections from nearly as many institutions. For example, there's Illinois State's A University Goes to War, World War I Women, an impressive collection of documents relating to what was then ISNU and the so-called War to End All Wars. On the IDA site, you can find LaSalle Public Library's Illinois Valley History Collection, Columbia College's John Frschetti Editorial Cartoon Collection, and on and on and on. The easiest way to access the Pantagraph Negative Collection on the IDA site is via the McLean County Museum of History's own site, and it's super easy. If I can do it, anybody can. So from www.mchistory.org is what you see right here. Go to the Research tab and select Resources. From Resources, click on the Pantagraph Negative Collection, which will take you to, there you are, the IDA site and the 3 Pantagraph Negatives Collection. We've been digitizing so many images, and these are large files that they've had to break it up into 3 categories based on the timeline, obviously. So the IDA's 3 Pantagraph Negatives collections are 1930 to 39, 1940 to 45, and 1946 to 49. You can search all collections simultaneously, these and all the others I alluded to. You can search selected collections in unison, or search within one collection only, which we will do in a way here. The McLean County Museum of History is a not-for-profit, right? We take pride in that fact that we pay our own way for the most part, right? Where is the money then to digitize these negatives coming from? For that, we have state and federal grants to thank for. For example, we're currently working on the second grant, this one for $250,000 from the Institute of Museum of Library Services, entailing the digitization of some 50,000 negatives from the collection. So far, all told, we've digitized about 80,000 of the 1 million negatives. So obviously we have a ways to go. So for demonstration purposes, you'll see here that we're about to click on the browse hyperlink for the 1930-1939 portion of the collection. I've circled that in red. So we're in there now. So once in the 1930-39, we typed in the search bar Santa, which I did here, and that resulted in 27 hits, right? 27 photographs from the Pantagraph Negative Collection from 1930 to 1939 that somehow relate to Mr. Claus. So part of the ongoing work involves the grant work, that is, involves Assistant Archivist Rochelle Gridley attaching what's known as metadata to these digitized images. Metadata is a word for context. The date the photo was snapped, the photographer, subject matter, the groups or individuals identified, and other pertinent information. Without this metadata, searching such a collection would be really an exercise in futility. Other search terms, if you're interested in looking at photographs related to the holiday season, would be Christmas, obviously, shopping, and others as well. So we're going to click into that first Santa record there, you see right there. So we've clicked into that record and are given additional information and the opportunity, and I've circled that in red, to download a watermarked copy of the photo. And we don't charge that as an institution, though we appreciate your support as a not-for-profit, of course. And here's the photo in all its glory. And this is showing the Happy Harmony Club. Isn't that great? Of Clinton, DeWitt County, and Ray Lane playing Santa. Lane was an Illinois Central Railroad brakeman who had been playing Santa in the area for 30-some years. And how do we know that? Well, this particular photograph appeared on page 5 of the December 18th, 1937 Pantagraph. So Rochelle Gridley was able to do the research and attach the metadata to this image. So you can search, for example, for Mr. Lane, who's playing Santa, and come across this photograph as well. Okay, we'll return to more fabulous photos and their somewhat problematic nature in a moment. McLean County, some of you may know, but some of you might not, was born, or I should say established as a political, bureaucratic, geographical entity on Christmas Day, 1830. Yes, on December 25th, 1830, lawmakers in the Illinois General Assembly, the state capital was then located in Vandalia, created 2 new counties in their fast-growing state. The 2 counties were McLean and Coles, the latter with Charleston, of course, as its county seat. Interestingly, the next county established by the state legislature was about 3 weeks later, January 15th, 1831, and that county was Cook County, with Chicago as the seat. Anyway, McLean County had been part of Tazewell County since 1827, but settlers around Blooming Grove, that'd be kind of south of downtown Bloomington and into Bloomington Township, had been tiring of the 25-mile trek to Mackinac Town, which was then the seat of Tazewell County, where they had to go to vote, to serve on a jury, to obtain a marriage license, or whatever. McLean County's namesake, John McLean, was an Illinois politician who had died 2 months before the county's establishment in October 1830. Hence, white guy dies, named the county for the white guy. He was Illinois' first U.S. congressman. Illinois is established as a state, of course, in 1880. So John McLean, the namesake from McLean County, is our first congressman. Then he was Speaker of the Illinois House of Representatives and then even U.S. Senator. His pioneering political career, though, in the Prairie State is forever marred by the fact that he championed the institution of slavery and even supported efforts to see it spread into Illinois. So there's that to think about. Okay, why, one might wonder, was the state legislature meeting Christmas Day back in 1830? Didn't those men, and they were of course all men back then, have better things to do? Well, in the decades before and after the Civil War, the focal point of the holiday season, at least in the United States, was not Christmas, but rather New Year's Day. Before trimming the tree and exchanging presents came to dominate the holiday season, there was the New Year's tradition known as calling. This all but forgotten practice, at least in the upper echelons of a community like Bloomington, consisted of well-to-do or up-and-coming gentlemen and their social equals making the neighborhood rounds and calling on their female acquaintances, who would then open their homes to entertain guests with buffet-style meals and music and dancing and a hot toddy or 2 or 3 or 4. In fact, what was intended to be a high-toned society event often deteriorated into groups of inebriated young men stumbling about house to house, and they would leave the often whimsical cards at each stop, signifying that they had made that said stop. And we see 2 cards here. John A. Jackman, that's lower right, was superintendent of motive power for the Chicago and Elton Railroad from 1864 to 1879. We have a nice collection of New Year's Day calling cards in our archive collection. Here's 3 more. They're just beautiful if you like this kind of thing. One of the cards, the one in the lower left, would be one of the names on that card is Joseph W. Pfeiffer. Of course, he will go on to become the 19th governor of Illinois, 1889 to 1893. And his daughter, more interestingly, I think, Florence Pfeiffer Bohr, becomes the first woman to serve in the Illinois State Senate. That's in the 1920s. No temptation schward off. I had to think about this one. Former museum executive director Greg Coos told me, though, that this term is to be read as a German accented pronunciation of swore off. as in pledging to swear off drinking. This was clearly a playful rebuke of temperance and prohibition, which the Germans enjoyed making fun of. Although one would think the practice of decorating and lighting the Christmas tree goes back to time immemorial, it did not become a common practice in most American homes until the 20th century. The Christmas tree is a tradition of German origin, of course, and its acceptance in the English-speaking world was given a boost in 1840 when Queen Victoria of Great Britain married her German cousin, Prince Albert. In this stretch of central Illinois, Bloomington's sizable German community played a leading role in popularizing Christmas trees. One of the earliest local references to this tradition dates to December 1858. That's when German freethinker and nurseryman Hermann Schroeder's Christmas tree attracted plenty of admirers, German and non-Germans alike, to his home on Front Street. The tree was said to be several feet in height and uncut as it had been transplanted for its temporary stay indoors. Quote, and this comes from the Pantagraph, "It was certainly a very handsome tree, and the manner in which it was decorated with burning candles and fruit added much to its appearance. Would that a larger number of our citizens were as fond of trees as Dr. Schroeder is." The museum archives includes a fantastic set of color plates advertising selections from Schroeder's nursery, and I had to show off one here. I just couldn't help myself. And it helps that red currants have become a holiday favorite for many. But non-German residents in this stretch of central Illinois were, truth be told, kind of slow to welcome Christmas trees into their homes. During the 1900 holiday season, 120 years ago, for example, fewer than 1 in 10 Bloomington households featured a Christmas tree. But as we could see here, by the late 1930s, things had changed. And we're glad they are, right? Who doesn't love a Christmas tree? Here are Jerry Miller left and Johnny Bowman welcoming the arrival of the season's first big consignment of Christmas trees via rail to the Twin Cities. This is the warehouse district they're at south of downtown Bloomington, when that warehouse district was humming. Quote, this is from the Pantagraph again, "Christmas isn't far off when big balsams like these from the Rocky Mountain slopes show up." That was the part of the caption that appeared with this photograph. Back in the 19th century, a stretch of East Washington Street from downtown Bloomington to the Illinois Central Railroad tracks, that'd be Constitution Trail today, was the best place to catch the area's fancier sleighs and their bundled up riders promenading in high style. The heyday of sleighing carnivals, as they were known, a wintertime spectacle for sure, dates to the 1870s and the 1880s. Quote, "It was a beautiful sight to see the groups of fast trotters as they came flying down the smooth and beautiful avenue." This is East Washington Street. "The noble horses steaming with quivering muscles." This is Christmas Day, 1878, as I said, along East Washington Street. And back to the quote, "Many young ladies were out and looked their loveliest, the fresh air, the excitement deepening the crimson of their cheeks and lips and adding luster to sparkling eyes." Oh yes, romance and sleighing were inextricably tied, as we can surmise here with all this talk about quivering muscles and crimson lips. Smaller sleighs were known as cutters, with many offering snug accommodations for two, and as such became a favorite for those in the throes of courtship. And groups of young men and women would pile into larger sleighs for moonlight jaunts out into the countryside. Doesn't that sound quite lovely? On January 11th, 1879, if you can imagine this, there was a grand sleighing carnival along East Washington Street featuring about 200 sleighs, many smartly decorated, and some 3,000 spectators. We don't have many photographs of sleighs on Bloomington streets, but I knew, given the strengths of our collections in the library and the archives, that I could find something, and sure enough, here's a catalog from Benoni S. Green's Harness and Saddlery business, featuring a line of sleigh bells, which is kind of neat. Beginning in 1925 and continuing off and on for 70 years, the former Scottish Rite Temple played host to a local adaptation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. The stage version was the work of Delmar D. Dara, a key figure in Bloomington's cultural life during the first half of the 20th century. Dara played an instrumental role in the construction of the Masonic Scottish Rite Temple, what we know today as the Bloomington Center for the Performing Arts, which opened in 1922. With the temple's auditorium and oversized stage in mind, Dara created a series of ambitious theatrical productions, most famously, of course, the American Passion Play, but A Christmas Carol was another one. Dara was not only the writer, or the adapter, but the original director and producer. He also supervised the lighting and set design work. After its inaugural run in 1925, Dickens' classic was brought back every 2 or 3 years. George Morrow as Scrooge scowls here at his 4-year-old son, George Jr., who was also a cast member back in 1949. It was said that Morrow's portrayal of Scrooge was worthy of Dickens' timeless characterization of the old man as a, quote, squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. The 1949 production mirrored its predecessors, running about 3 hours and featuring an impressively large cast of 150 and no less than 32 scene changes, if you could believe that. The play was performed at the old consistory into the mid-1990s, and I say bring it back, right? I'd love to see it performed again at the Bloomington Center for Performing Arts. Yes, as you can tell by now, this Holiday Stories program is somewhat necessarily, given the demographic composition of the county since its settlement, weighted toward the Christian holiday of Christmas. But the holiday season of McLean County has long meant more than simply Christmas, and I don't really need to tell any of us that. The Moorish influenced Moses Montefiore Temple, completed in 1889, remains a visible symbol of Bloomington's small but influential Jewish community. Physical structures, houses of worship, I think especially, can be enduring reminders that one of our community strengths has been and will remain ethnic, racial, and religious diversity. This comes from our Pantagraph print collection. So in addition to the negatives collection, we also have a kind of a photo morgue, if you will, as it was known in the newspaper business, or a print collection. And I just couldn't help knowing the Gordons of running this wonderful photograph. George and Myra Gordon have lived in the Twin Cities. A lot of you know them well. For nearly a half century, Myra played an instrumental role in the establishment and success of the Ecology Action Center. It was known originally as Operation Recycle, and made a name for herself with the Illinois Prairie Community Foundation. George, of course, taught politics and government at Illinois State University for 38 years, but he's perhaps better known, at least now, for his more than 2 decades serving as on the elected McLean County Board. The holiday season also has come to include newer traditions such as Kwanzaa, an annual celebration of African American culture that begins on December 26th and continues through the new year, January 1. Here are Afaya Adams and her father Clayton Adams taking part in the Kwanzaa celebration in Bloomington back in 2002. In many ways, American Jews embraced the holiday season, helping to shape both commercially and culturally how our nation celebrates the Christian holiday of Christmas. Think of Irving Berlin's song, White Christmas, right? And the great New York City department store, Gimbel's and Macy's, right? Think of the role Jews have played in Christmas traditions in America. In Bloomington, Jews played a significant role in the history of downtown retailing. As early as 1877, the Pantagraph commented in a genial manner that, quote, a goodly portion of the trade of the city, especially in the clothing line, is in Jewish hands. It would be difficult to tell the story of downtown Bloomington's retail scene without a nod to businessmen and businesswomen with the surnames Bachrach and Griesheim, Heldman, Mandel, Stern, and Livingston, especially Livingston. Founded in March 1866 by Sam and Aaron Livingston, the dry goods establishment that would become Livingston's was located in the middle of the 100 block of West Washington Street. That's the south side of the courthouse square. And there, the department store remained for 113 years. Livingston descendants held a stake in the store until 1977, 2 years before it went out of business. And of course, today, the lower floor of this former department store is occupied by Michael's Restaurant. An essay in the November 27th New York Times, so about a week or so ago, titled The Loneliness of One-Click Shopping and written by Alec McGillis, looked at the sad fate of brick and mortar stores as they closed by the thousands, unable to compete with the brutal efficiencies of Amazon and other online retailers. So I'm going to quote here from a recent New York Times essay called The Loneliness of One-Click Shopping. The essay examines the ongoing retail apocalypse through the rise and fall of the Bon-Ton department store chain out of Pennsylvania in the Ohio River Valley. Quote, by 1912, the shop in York, Pennsylvania had moved into a resplendent new building, a 4-story terracotta extravaganza with 27 departments spread across 37,000 square feet, bedding and houseware, stationery, cloaks and suits, etc., etc. Elevators were operated by smartly clad women. The mezzanine tea room became a central meeting place. Musicians entertained shoppers on Friday and Saturdays, and every Christmas season, the store installed elaborate window displays and hosted a parade. The same thing happened here in Bloomington, of course. And going back to the article, quote, this was America's golden era of department stores when the average visit by a shopper could last an astonishing 2 hours. New York had, of course, Lord & Taylor, Bloomingdale's, Chicago had Marshall Field, Philadelphia had Wanamaker's, and Bloomington, I might add, had Livingston's and plenty of other local stores that could tell the same story. In 1930, Livingston's had some 42,300 square feet of floor space, which at the time made it one of the larger department stores in all of downstate Illinois. But to put that in perspective, by way of comparison, some Walmart supercenters today span something like 225,000 square feet, or 5 to 6 times what Livingston's was. Though in 1946, Livingston adds another floor by excavating a full basement to hold its household appliance department and a fur storage vault. Yet, as we celebrate these wonderful holiday images for their historical importance and their aesthetic beauty, to cite 2 reasons, we must not lose sight of the limitations of the Pantagraph Negative Collection. Marginalized communities, most significantly the Black communities in Bloomington-Normal, were also marginalized in the pages of the Pantagraph, and that marginalization then shows up in the collection itself. There are thousands, literally thousands of photographs showing folks having a grand old time at the Bloomington Country Club, for instance. On the other hand, to cite just a representative example, there are precious few photographs in the Pantagraph Negative Collection featuring Mount Pisgah Baptist Church, the oldest Black Baptist church in the Twin Cities. So what I'm trying to say here is that sometimes the gaps in a historical collection can speak louder than the collection itself. An appreciation and understanding of American history must include a recognition of these absences. So while we enjoy these photographs, we must be cognizant of the fact that there are things missing. Some of the Livingston photos I've showed here also came from the museum's Hugh A. Henry collection. After the 1937 death of Milton Livingston, Hugh Henry, who had served as Livingston's advertising and display manager, floor superintendent, and store manager, became a partner in the business. Longtime museum volunteer Bill LeBounty, whose father worked for years at Livingston's, played an instrumental role in getting this invaluable collection of retail photos donated to the museum. That was more than a decade ago. No one had to mask up, right, or practice social distancing back in the 1950s, or any of the photographs we're looking at here. Okay, here's a lovely aerial of downtown Bloomington. I could spend an hour on this photo, or anyone like it alone, as people who know me would testify. But we're not going to do that, of course. But if I just want to point this out, let's look at this. If you could see the cursor here, 6 square blocks of the south end of downtown Bloomington. That may not look familiar to you. The reason is that that was all raised in the 1950s and into the 1970s to make way for urban renewal, the Law and Justice Center super block, right? Including the McLean County Law and Justice Center, multi-story parking deck, and a nondescript office building. So we lost 6 contiguous blocks of old downtown Bloomington because of that, because of urban renewal. So I'm focusing in. Up until the 1970s, downtown Bloomington was one of the retail centers of central Illinois. And if you grew up around here and are in your late 50s or older, you certainly know that. The circle there is the courthouse square, now the McLean County Museum of History in the Museum Square. So A would be Sears Roebuck. Sears, believe it or not, arrived in downtown Bloomington in the late 1920s. The building they occupied is now best known for being home to Fox and Hound's Hair Studio and Day Spa. B marks J.C. Penney, which from 1937 to 1966 occupied the 3-story red pressed brick Braley Field building located on the west side of the courthouse square, corner of Center and Jefferson. The lower level today is now occupied by McGuire Bar and Grill. C would point out W.H. Rollins, that's on the north side of the square, the big successful local retailer for the community's most fashionable women. D, you don't get a good view of it because it's blocked by the People's Bank building, but that would be Livingston's on the south side of the courthouse, now Museum Square. And E is the front and center building. It was originally a German Jewish marketplace, actually owned by relatives of the Livingstons that ran the department store by that name. But by this time it's Montgomery Ward, which today, like too much of downtown Bloomington, stands vacant. Of course, downtown retail was more than department stores. There were specialty clothing stores, furniture stores, jewelers, book and stationery shops, shoe stores, etc. A scene like this would have been replayed over and over again, time and time again, for many decades in downtown Bloomington. And still does to some extent, because we have some good local retailers that have struggled mightily, obviously, the last few months, but are hanging in there and frankly could use your business, right? The 200 block of North Main Street, that's where Kresge's was located, the east side of the courthouse square. It was once one of the busiest, most happening stretches in all the Twin Cities. The block was once home to McClellan Stores, SS Kresge's $1 store and Kresge's 10-cent store, Biazzi's Drug Store, the Jefferson Cafeteria, the German-American State Bank, and dozens of lawyers, dentists, doctors, and other professional types working out of offices in the Griesheim and Unity buildings. Think about how crowded the sidewalks were during the heyday or the golden era of downtown Bloomington. Illinois State University Distinguished Professor Emeritus Mark Wyman and local educator and historian Jack Muirhead co-authored an article in the summer 2017 issue of the Journal of the Illinois State Historical Society. Their article was called, quote, "Jim Crow Comes to Central Illinois, Racial Segregation in 20th Century Bloomington-Normal." In this article, Dr. Wyman and Jack Muirhead detailed the deterioration of civil rights, racial equality, and opportunity for African Americans in the first half of the 20th century. So during this period, Blacks in Bloomington-Normal faced increasing discrimination in public accommodation, including local hotels, restaurants, and theaters. And I know in the United States, we tend to think that the arc of history bends toward justice. And while that might be true, there are times in our history where hard-won progress has been sacrificed to prejudice and fear. The early decades of the 20th century were such a time. Jim Crow comes to central Illinois, not only to Bloomington-Normal, but throughout the Midwest and central Illinois communities, such as Peoria, Springfield, Decatur, Champaign, and others. So why am I talking about this? For our purposes here, we must remember this. Blacks could shop in downtown department stores and other retail stores, but unlike white customers, they were not allowed to try on clothing. If blacks wanted to eat downtown, they had to order out the back door and take their meal in a bag. When they wanted to go to a movie or a play, they had to sit in designated sections, and that appalling situation lasted from the turn of the last century into the World War II period and a little after. In 1908, the board overseeing Miller Park, Bloomington's largest public green space, established separate and grossly unequal beaches and bathing facilities. White swimmers had exclusive use of the park's lake and its larger beach and cleaner waters, while colored residents were restricted to the park's smaller lagoon. This disgraceful arrangement continued into the early 1950s. Blacks, I think we need to remember, also encountered nearly insurmountable barriers when it came to accessing middle-class jobs and middle-class housing. Generally speaking, leading employers did not hire African Americans for white-collar jobs or those in the skilled trades locally until the 1960s. Local black students could attend Illinois State Normal University and earn education degrees, but once they graduated, they had to go elsewhere to teach. Think about this brain drain, right? We denied local black families that were rich in human capital a ticket to the middle class, right? Secure home ownership and a stake in the American dream. Several months ago, I began looking at Miller Park aerials in our collection in order to see what was there when it came to views, if any, of the Black Beach, and we did find a few. In a summer 1950 exchange between the NAACP, the local NAACP, and the McLean County Health Department tells us that the bathhouse was little more than a wood frame shack with shower stalls and no water or sewer hookup. And the old stable, that would be this building right here, which I think is actually an old commercial poultry house, contained two outhouse toilets, which were full and had no seat covers. The White Beach, on the other hand, had a spacious brick bathhouse and a large sandy beach. Again, this situation lasted into the early 1950s in Bloomington. And of course, on September 20th, 2018, the McLean County Museum of History, in partnership with the city of Bloomington, the local chapter of the NAACP, and Not in Our Town, Bloomington-Normal, dedicated an Illinois State Historical Society marker to memorializing this dark chapter in the Twin Cities in Twin City history. And Mark Wyman, the Illinois State history professor who played a leading role in bringing this story to the community's attention once again, echoed the words of George W. Bush, who said this at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. A great nation does not hide its history, it faces its flaws and it corrects them. Race relations in the first half of the 20th century were such that the Twin Cities separated orphans by the color of their skin. Established in 1918, the McLean County Home for Colored Children was renamed the Booker T. Washington Home in 1942. It was located on the 1200 block of West Moulton, which of course is now West MacArthur Avenue. The home's children attended Bloomington Public Schools and local churches. Financial support came from donations raised by a public spirited board, as well as wider efforts such as an annual fundraising drive known as Community Chest, which was a precursor of sorts to United Way of McLean County. Louise and Napoleon Calamise served as the home's caretakers from 1927 to 1957, and you see Louise and Napoleon Calamise in this photograph here from 1948. And here's a photograph from the same set. The Calamises, by the way, were featured in the museum's 2019 Evergreen Cemetery Walk. The McLean County Museum of History holds in its archives, where I work, the Booker T. Washington Home Collection. So in addition to organizational papers and news clippings and promotional material, the collection includes a record book featuring a list of children admitted to the home from 1921 to 1950. In the late 1960s, the Booker T. Washington home merged with the Lucy Orm Morgan home, a group home for white girls. And today, Children's Home and Aid is the successor organization of these two local institutions, and also Victory Hall in Normal. Before the internet, before lighted screens, before video gaming, before Netflix, people got out a lot more, as we're going to see here in a second. Life was much more communitarian. People were more active in community events such as parades. So here we see the 1929 parade. I love this photograph because those are actual reindeer. I don't know how that worked out. But this is the 300 block of North Main Street in the heart of downtown Bloomington. We have a good look at the 44-room Mid-City Hotel, if you can see my cursor right there, which was converted, of course, a few years back by Gay Beck into 6 two-story townhouse-type apartments. This is the 6th annual Christmas Jubilee. The city of Bloomington would hold such a Jubilee back during the Great Depression era. Several thousand children would pack the Illini Theater, formerly known as the Chatterton Opera House, on the 100 block of East Market Street for morning and afternoon shows. One of the sponsors, as we see here, was Bunn and Humphreys Incorporated, which was a big local wholesale grocer. Once in the theater, children were treated to comedy film shorts and cartoons. They would sing Christmas carols, and the program, of course, would end with an appearance by Santa Claus, who would hand out candy and nuts, sometimes apples and oranges, to everyone. The Chatterton Illini Theater is now home to Abundant Life Ministries. This is the building immediately west of Luca Grill, right on East Market Street. Another community event, which was once quite popular, was the Christmas Sing. And here we see the Christmas Sing from 1934, several days before Christmas, the 8th annual Christmas Carol Sing. There's a view from 1935 with members of the municipal band, community band. Here's a view from 1937, and I say again, please bring back this tradition. Wouldn't you love to hang out in downtown Bloomington with several thousand folk and sing Christmas carols for an hour or two? Here's an undated view from our print collection. We see W.B. Reed and Company, a retail, wholesale book, stationery, and school supply store in the back there. The last tenant was CVS Pharmacy. It's now vacant, like a lot of downtown Bloomington, but that's a lecture for another day. We also see to the right there, Gus A. Enzenberger and Son Furniture, which that building has since been converted to condos. And I wondered what this structure was here, but that's obviously a screen to project the lyrics. And I wondered who needs lyrics projected for Christmas carols, right? Doesn't everybody know the words? The town of Normal also had kind of a Christmas Jubilee, an annual Christmas program. Here we see a great photograph at the Normal Theater, December 23rd, 1944. They had about 600 plus grade schoolers packed into the Normal Theater. Note they all have ice cream cups. And yep, they're all holding their cups, waiting to be told that they could open their cups. And this boy gets a jump start on the whole thing. And you can see the girl to the right is not happy. Her expression, I think, must be like, why I never. And there's another enlargement of that same setup. I don't have time to tell all the stories I want to tell, but allow here for a quick detour into a unique artist with Christmas or holiday ties and local ties. Quote, just as Monet, it has been said, glorified in haystacks, painting them over and over again in the changing light, so does Wiocheske glory in snow. Born in 1887 and in Bloomington and raised in Bloomington, Renaud William R.W. Wiocheske, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing the surname, spent most of his professional life in an artist colony in Woodstock, New York, where he practiced printmaking, earning notice for his etchings. His father, William Wiocheske, was born in Germany and settled in Bloomington as a young child and became a grocer, blacksmith, and carriage and wagon maker. So the artist, R.W. Wiocheske, came from middle-class, working-class roots, like a lot of German Americans in Bloomington. R.W. Wioseske's first one-man show came in 1932, and throughout the decade, his prints with titles such as Hemlock and Winter, Windblown Birches, and Winter in the Catskills were shown in exhibitions from New York City to Los Angeles. And not surprisingly, Wioseske's snow scenes found their way onto Christmas cards published by the American Artist Group, Arthur Ackerman and Son of Chicago, and perhaps others. The cards shown here were donated to the museum by Jewel and Elsie Schalk. In 2004, the cards belonged to Jewel's parents, Bessie and Walter Schalk. R.W. Wiocheske and Walter Schalk were friends. So Jewel, the donor, was a longtime museum volunteer who passed away last month at the age of 98. And with Elsie, another beloved volunteer who had passed away a few years earlier, I thought certainly this would be a wonderful opportunity to kind of remember Elsie and Jewel Schalk, two museum volunteers. For many local residents in their late 50s, Christmas time in the Twin Cities meant the Livingston Santas, right? From the 1940s into the mid-1970s, two 13-foot tall plastic Santas were hoisted onto the overhang of the Livingston's department store. And the holiday season also meant the Be of Good Cheer signage, and you can see right above that, which was more permanent signage, one of Illinois' great stores, established 1866, as we've already been told. These Santas were big and tall, certainly, but childhood memory being what it is, seems like not a holiday season goes by where we don't get a call from somebody wanting to know the story of the Livingston Santas as they remembered it as children. And they always remember the Santas being not 13 feet tall, but 20 feet or 30 feet or many stories tall. And when we tell them, no, we've got articles saying they were only 13 feet tall, they're always disappointed. So inspired by the iconic Livingston Santas this season, right now, you can take your photo with this new Santa on the square, sponsored by the City of Bloomington, the McLean County Museum of History, and support from Seth Q and the Illinois Farm Bureau. This Santa was designed by Ken Johnson of Bloomington, father to Museum Education Program Coordinator Hannah Johnson. And here are Museum Development Assistant Brandy Maloney and Museum Visitor Center Director Joe McDonald, who were kind enough to pose for me earlier today. You'll find both Santa as well as the downtown holiday tree on Main Street on the east side of the museum square. So what you need to do is share the photos you take with your friends and families and neighbors via the hashtag Santa on the Square. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what a hashtag is, but I'm told it has something to do with what's called social media. So I would just go with it. By the mid-1960s, Bloomington was downtown Bloomington was in decline as a retail center, certainly. Sears and Penney's left downtown for Eastland Mall in 1966, and Ward's moved to College Hills Mall around 1980. Locally owned department and clothing stores found it increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to compete against the enormous economies of scale enjoyed by the likes of Sears and other retail giants. Livingston's, for example, closed in 1979. Now, of course, online retailing has laid waste to the likes of Sears and Penney's and others. Okay, we're wrapping up here, so we have that to look forward to, right? But I want to kind of show this wonderful procession or series of photographs dating to the Santa Parade on December 5th, 1948. We kind of opened up with a photo of that, the young girl in the sleigh, Santa Jr. So Santa arrived on December 5th, 1948 at the Union Depot via the Santa Express, a Gulf Mobile and Ohio Railroad special, to the depot on the west side of Bloomington. Then Santa would head down West Washington Street to the Courthouse Square. And there's Santa on the back of the caboose. We see a beautiful view, partial view of the old Union Depot, which no longer stands on the west side of Bloomington. And let's do an enlargement here. Nothing says happy holidays, right, folks, like a cigar smoking clown. Well, could you imagine pulling that off today? I think you get a few irate parents, I think. So here's Santa now proceeding to the courthouse square down West Washington Street. You got a good look here at the old McLean County Coal Company slag pile. The McLean County Coal Company was once the largest and most successful coal mine in the area. And it was in operation on the west side of Bloomington from 1867 into the 1920s. So we continue the parade. Here's Santa's wagon passing the 1000 block of West Washington Street with Morris Avenue to the east or to the right. Beginning in the late 19th century, this one block stretch was home to candy, cigar, and clothing stores, short order diners, saloons, groceries, barbershops, modest apartments, and some light industry. This block was certainly a good place to do business back in the day. Next door, as I said, was the McLean County Coal Company mine, the city's main rail passenger station, and the Paul F. Bite Candy Factory. And thus, the commercial block served not only neighborhood residents, but the local workforce and railway travelers. Let's continue on, or end with the parade here. On the courthouse square, the Pantagraph reported that some 6,000 children, parents, and others greeted Santa. As he made his way onto the square, there was usually a temporary structure on the square, kind of Santa's village, if you will, where Santa then would greet children in the evenings as parents shopped downtown. That tradition, of course, continues today, although we're in the COVID-19 pandemic, in Uptown Normal. Okay, one can't provide an overview of local holiday traditions and stories without paying respects to Merlin Kennedy as Bloomington's Black Santa. Kennedy became president of the local chapter of the NAACP in 1964. As a civil rights leader, he participated in desegregation and voter registration efforts and helped organize Bloomington's first Human Relations Commission. For the city's 1965 Christmas parade, a year before the photo here. So I'm first going to talk about the 1965 Bloomington City Christmas Parade. The NAACP sponsored a float featuring a racially diverse group of children and Merlin Kennedy dressed as Santa. The problem was Bloomington Mayor Bob McGraw was not amused, and he responded by seeking to ban what he termed controversial floats in future Christmas parades. So let's then march ahead 1 year to December 8th, 1966. The NAACP and Merlin Kennedy remain undeterred. For this year's parade, as I said, held December 8th, 1966, Merlin Kennedy dressed once more as Santa, fully intending to buck Mayor McGraw's so-called one Santa rule. When the NAACP float pulled onto the parade route, though, Bloomington police blocked it with a car. Armed officers then began arguing with NAACP members and their supporters. Meanwhile, during this commotion, Kennedy climbed down the float and began heading toward the parade. But before he could go too far, he was stopped by several police officers. And then Carol Cox, an ISU English professor and local activist who was part of the float effort, shouted, "They're arresting Santa Claus." Could you imagine that? Arresting Santa Claus? So not knowing what to do, the police let Kennedy go. And so Bloomington's Black Santa walked the sidewalk along the parade route, waving to spectators. The story was picked up by the Decatur Herald newspaper, the Associated Press Wire, and then as we see here, the, quote, Weekly Negro News Magazine, end quote, Digest, Jet Magazine. In 2015, Merlin Kennedy suited up as Santa for the Uptown Station Meet Santa Claus attraction. Merlin Kennedy passed away in October 2019 at the age of 92. The Kennedy family, though, donated the Santa suit to the museum where it is on display in our Community and Conflict exhibit. And when we reopen after the pandemic and after our public restroom restoration and our lighting restoration, you'll be able to visit once again this wonderful exhibit and many others. The museum also holds a collection of Merlin Kennedy and his wife Beulah's personal papers. This collection includes documents from Kennedy's time on the Bloomington Human Relations Commission and his time as president of the local chapter of the NAACP. but also his work history and participation in amateur athletics. He loved softball and golf. In a quarter century since reopening as a town-operated venue, catching a classic holiday film at the Normal Theater has become a tradition for many area friends and family, especially when it comes to the 1954 Bing Crosby musical White Christmas and It's a Wonderful Life, starring Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed from 1947. It's a Wonderful Life opened in the Twin Cities on March 23rd, 1947 at the Irvin Theater on East Jefferson Street, along the Twin Cities' premier popcorn palace, right? Beautiful theater, no longer stands, of course. It's a parking lot like much of downtown Bloomington. While It's a Wonderful Life was here in Bloomington back in the spring of 1947, it only ran for just 1 week. It was a commercial flop, as is famously known today. Nationally, it became all but forgotten until falling into public domain, and then beginning in the 1970s was resurrected by countless local television stations across the nation as a holiday staple because it was in public domain. The copyright wasn't resecured until 1993. Remarkably, It's a Wonderful Life director Frank Capra visited the Twin Cities in March of 1978 for Illinois Wesleyan University's annual two-day Fine Arts Festival. This was sadly before Capra became a national treasure, so his appearance here in the Twin Cities just wasn't that big of a deal. And he screened It's a Wonderful Life, if you could believe it. Yet never before and never since has the Twin Cities welcomed such an influential, celebrated filmmaker. He stands today as one of the great humanists who forever champion empathy, compassion, and communitarian and small R Republican values in film, popular film. His body of work, of course, includes It Happened One Night from 1934, the Why We Fight series for the U.S. War Department during World War II, and the Cary Grant comedy Arsenic and Old Lace in 1944, and on and on. During his 1978 appearance at Illinois Wesleyan University, Capra told the Pantagraph that his subject was the human comedy. Okay, since the holidays are also about gift giving, here's a gift for you as I end this program. The McLean County Home Bureau owes its origin to local food conservation efforts during World War I and the remarkable woman, one of the most fascinating individuals in McLean County history, Clara Bryant. The group survives today as the County Association for Home and Community Education. Their cookbook from 1955 is one of more than 100 local cookbooks cataloged and shelved in the museum library stacks. I've scanned this now as a PDF, and I'm happy to share it with you electronically if you send me an email, and I'll send it as a PDF attachment. Notice in the lower right, that's a Swedish oatmeal cookie recipe by Norma Ashbrook, who was an active genealogist with a passion for local history, who passed away in 2009. Her husband, Dave, died in August this summer. Their children have donated a treasure trove of family papers and historical materials to the museum just in the past few months, where we are organizing the Ashbrook family collection, which will be housed in our archives. So anyways, send me an email. That's bkemp@mchistory.org, and I'll send you this cookbook published 65 holiday seasons ago. So I've likely run a little long per usual, so thanks for sticking it out. And I do hope, despite this most trying of years, this annus horribilis is the Latin term, I believe, that you and yours have a safe and sound and relaxing and warm and lovely holiday season. I'm now going to hand back the program to Museum Education Director Candace Summers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill, for a fascinating program. And I wish you would have said there were just going to be Christmas cookie recipes, because now we all want cookies. Thank you very much. We do have a few questions in the chat box, and I will open that up and read them. But if anyone else still has any questions, just drop them in the Q&A, and I will ask them accordingly. So first off, what everyone is dying to know, where are those Livingston Santas now?
Okay. Hannah Johnson in our education department probably can answer that better than I can, but Jeffrey Allen's, right, the regional chain of craft stores, I'm not sure that's the correct term, there's one in Bloomington. I believe Jeffrey Allen, someone could correct me here, is from the Champaign-Urbana area. He had purchased one or two a while back, and there had been talk over the past few years that he was restoring one or both of them. But according to Hannah, she had heard that at least one or both, again, I don't know, are now in the American Southwest, maybe Arizona. Does Jeffrey Allen have a place there? We're not quite sure. So there was hopes maybe one day of them returning to Bloomington so they can be enjoyed again. But alas, that is not to be, at least for now.
So that is why we have our wooden Santa on the square, modeled after the very awesome and longed for Livingston Santas. And just as a refresher, where was Rollins located on the square?
Yeah, so W.H. Rollins, one of the locally owned, it wasn't quite a full department store, but certainly in the clothing lines it was located on the north end of the courthouse square along Jefferson Street. There was also Clem's, which was another department store of a sort, also on the north end of the courthouse square. So remarkably, you had 6 or 7 department stores within about 4 blocks of downtown Bloomington at one time.
And Nancy Hobson asks, which downtown store had an escalator?
I know there was an escalator. See, the problem is I didn't grow up in the Twin Cities. I'm from the Chicago area, and as I always joked, you cannot replace growing up in a community, being a kid on a bike and pedaling around and knowing where things used to be and hearing stories like that. I know there was an escalator, I believe, on the 200 block of North Main Street in one of the commercial buildings there. I know there are people probably screaming at their screens right now because they know the answer here. So
a couple people answered in the chat that Kresge's had an escalator.
Okay, so yeah, again, that's the east side of the square. So
it'll be forever burned into our brains now that Kresge's had, because I am not originally from Bloomington-Normal either. So I always learn something new at these programs. And thank you to the local folks who have been here their lives to let us know. Were there any hat stores in downtown Bloomington?
Yeah, when I used to do a weekly column for the Pantagraph on Sunday, I devoted several columns to millinery. So there were hat stores, hat designers, but that kind of disappears to some extent by the 19-teens into the 1920s. Millinery is taken over by the department stores, such as Rollins. That's where you're going to get your hat shaped and cut right there. But there were other places before that. There was a kind of a small manufacturing place that made hats for shipment elsewhere at one point.
And Catherine Peterson wants to know, what were some of the famous eateries downtown?
Yeah, so for example, I think tomorrow, or if we didn't do today, on our Facebook page, we posted a Christmas party photograph from the Green Mill Cafe. The Green Mill Cafe was located on what would it be, the 200 block of West Washington Street. That's parking today. So the Green Mill Cafe would have been a place. There was Cotton's Village Inn was another popular place. Rollins had a small restaurant at one time, and there were other places as well.
All right, and Vanette Schwartz asks, when did the Santa Parade begin? And yes, it still exists, but not this year.
So I don't know, Van, good. I'm glad you could join us. I don't know the answer to that question, but we know that it was active in the 1920s, certainly.
All right. And one final question asked by Nancy Hobson again. She wanted to know a little bit more about the etchings that you talked about and where she could learn more about how etchings are made. Probably just ask Mr. Google.
Yeah, that would be one way to go, certainly. So I'm not a fine art artist by any means. So if you can do a Google search. I hate to recommend that, but for R.W. Wiocheske, and you can learn a little about the techniques that he used, such as dry point technique, the kind of the etching techniques that he used, and how those techniques then were commercially applied. So that is fascinating. Yes.
Excellent. Any last questions before we wrap up this evening's program? You have time to drop it in the chat or drop it in the Q&A. And while we are thinking about any other questions, I do want to thank everyone for coming and joining us for tonight's program. I hope it got everybody in the holiday spirit. I know it's going to help me when I go bake all my Christmas cookies now. Bill, I'm going to email you for those recipes as well, because there were some pretty cool ones there. And I want to invite you to our next program, which is this Thursday, December 10th at 12:10 p.m. for the final Lunch and Learn of 2020. We still have more Lunch and Learns next year. This Lunch and Learn will be Birds of a Feather Flock Together. Where do birds nest in Bloomington-Normal? Featuring Given Harper, professor of biology at Illinois Wesleyan University. And I'm trying to do multitasking. So you can register to participate in this free webinar by visiting the link I just dropped in the chat box, because it is a new a Zoom webinar, excuse me. So we hope you can join us for that program too. And I didn't see any other questions go in the chat, but I want to thank everyone. I hope that you have a safe and healthy and happy holidays, and look forward to seeing you Thursday, if not in the new year. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.